week that my main topic today was going to be diving into past life connections, otherwise known as karmic relationships or karmic connections. And that feeling when you meet someone where you feel like you've just known them your whole life. And, what is that? And why does that happen? I think there's a really important distinction here. And I have learned this from my own experiences, that I really do believe that karmic relationships and these connections do exist. And there are people from our past lives that we have unfinished business with. We meet them again in this life to try and close that chapter. However, I think it's really easy to mistake a karmic relationship for anxious attachment. And I can say this pretty confidently because I've experienced multiple times where I've felt like I was having a karmic relationship and upon reflection realized I really wasn't. And I do know the times that I really have experienced that karmic relationship and understanding that just because you have that, it doesn't mean that it's for this life. So I wanted to share some personal experiences of what this has meant for me and how upon reflection, I've been able to tell the difference between a karmic connection and anxious attachment. And I think there's a few signals that you can kind of look at. The first signal is, I think the biggest thing that I take away is when I retell the story of these specific karmic connections, I ask myself, does it feel grounded and emotional? Or does it feel anxious and frantic? I think first, I'll start with my biggest karmic relationship and connection. So years ago, I was back home in Australia for Christmas and New Year's, and I was in Byron Bay for New Year's Eve, which is this beautiful little beach town in New South Wales on the east coast of Australia. And one of my friends from New York was visiting, and we had gone to Byron with some of my high school friends. And this is just like a night that will forever be etched in my brain. We'd gone to dinner, and then we were going to this party. And I remember walking into the party, and I'd kind of clocked this like super tall guy as he was entering the party as well. But, didn't think anything of it. We remember we were kind of in this downstairs area for a bit, and then we decided to go to this upstairs mezzanine. And maybe we'd been there for like an hour. And as we walked up the stairs, I made eyes with the guy pretty much like directly as I'm coming up the stairs that I had noticed earlier as we were coming into the party. And I felt just like this immediate pull. And he immediately walked over to me. I just remember just like this instant, just as soon as I arrived at that upstairs level, he did not leave my side. And he was just like in that viewpoint. I don't even remember like standing upstairs for more than 5 seconds before he had come over and was speaking to us. And I have this distinct recollection of standing on that rooftop talking about just life. And I think this was probably within like an hour of us meeting each other. And I distinctly remember him saying, I feel like I've known you before. And I was like, I feel the exact same way. It was this immediate draw. And it was exactly that karmic connection feeling, like we had known each other forever. And I remember the New Year's Eve countdown began and the song Shooting Stars was playing. Bag Raiders was actually DJing. That's right. So that's why Shooting Stars was playing. And he was my New Year's kiss, obviously. And we continued to party with him and his friends all that night. And the next day, he invited me to this area in Byron called Tea Tree Lake. It's a lake on the beach, and the water has been stained the color of tea tree from the leaves of the trees, and it's a really spiritual place where Aboriginal women would actually go to give birth. So it's known in the kind of local community as a very healing place. And we'd gone there with him and his friends, and I just remember being in the water and just like feeling so connected to this person. And then the next day, he wanted to take me on a date before I left to go back up to where my family was in Australia before I went back to New York. And he picked me up during the day, and we drove up to the Byron Bay hinterland, which is all more kind of rainforest. It's not beachy. And we went to this waterfall and this local little like Aussie pub that I remember we drove by. And I love like the old school Aussie pubs that are in the small towns. They're very like beautiful, almost Queenslander style homes is kind of what they're called. And I just remember just these beautiful, beautiful few days with him that will forever be etched in my brain, and just this deep, deep, deep connection. It was honestly wild at the time. And I left Byron and I was devastated. I was sobbing. Like, I was so sad. And my girlfriend was even like, "You're so sad." And I'm like, "Girl, I don't even know how to describe to you why I'm so sad. It's kind of wild." And we ended up staying in touch. And within a few weeks, we had already talked about maybe we'd go on a trip and meet each other somewhere. And I remember I'd gone back to New York and we were talking about where it was that we could possibly meet. And we landed on Hawaii because Hawaii was pretty much equal distance for me and him between the East Coast of Australia and the East Coast of the US. So we booked this, I think it was 7 to 10 days. I really can't remember. And I remember getting on the airplane and just being like, "Oh my God, I don't know this guy that well." And I wasn't scared at all in that reason, but it was more like, do I kiss him when I see him? Like, how do I greet him? And I just couldn't stop thinking about that. And I arrived in Hawaii. He had gotten there earlier. He'd picked up the rental car and he'd picked me up from the airport, and he was there at the gate, baggage claim or something. And we did kiss immediately as soon as I saw him. And I was like, "Great, that's out of the way." And then it just felt super easy. And honestly, it's still hands down of my single days, my all-time favorite trip with a guy I was dating, bar who I'm with now, Jeffrey. Love you, babe. But my single days, hands down. And I remember every day we would just get up super early and we were hiking, and he was a surfer. So he'd be surfing a ton, and he brought all his boards from Australia, and I would just be sitting on the beach and reading my book. And we would drive all around the island, going to all these little food spots and hiking. And we were staying on Oahu, which is a pretty big island. And I just felt this connection was so deep and so visceral. And ultimately, it was incredibly heartbreaking because I think both of us, we both knew it couldn't go anywhere. I wasn't willing to leave New York, and he was not willing to leave Byron Bay, and nor would I have wanted that, nor I think would he have wanted that for me either. We had our lives totally built in those places, and our lives are really different too. I think there was definitely some anxious and avoidant attachment issues at play for sure, just because that was something I was dealing with a lot in that time generally, and something that I generally deal with normally in how I approach my relationships. But I wouldn't necessarily define it as an anxious attached relationship. It did play a part, but there was a karmic connection, and there is one here. And I'm such a romantic, so I think I just really lived in this whole idea of how it might possibly could work. And I didn't even want to think about it not working. Despite I'm just reflecting on it now because I'm thinking I did know it wasn't going to work, but I just don't think I ever even went there. I was like, let's just keep talking and we'll keep talking, and we'll just keep hanging out and it'll just keep going that way, but not really thinking past that, which I think is a classic thing you do in your 20s anyways. But the last day, I was so sad saying goodbye, and he was getting on the plane first. So I went to his gate. I had a few more hours until my flight left, and he was the last person to get on the plane, and I stood there and watched him. And I remember staring at the gate and seeing him get onto the plane and thinking, if he looks back, it wasn't me that just felt this. And just as he kind of rounded the edge, he looked back, and I just knew in that moment, all of it was real. It was so real. And I don't know why it was that moment. It just felt like a one last glimpse, and let's have that snapshot that we'll have forever. But beyond all of that, and this beautiful story of being in this beautiful country and having these great experiences together, it was a fantasy. And, we kept in touch for a few months afterwards, having phone calls, but it was extremely difficult not really knowing where it was going to go. And I could feel myself getting more nervous. And I think what was so sad is unfortunately, the way it actually ended was that he ghosted me, which is awful. And I really struggled with it, guys. It was so bad. I was so upset. It took me honestly years to get over it. I was so deeply, deeply, deeply hurt because it felt like everything that I thought was real was maybe not real. And one of the things I loved about him was just how kind he was to me and just this beautiful connection. And it just felt like such a slap in the face. But years later, I actually was living back in Australia. So this was in 2021, I think. And it must have been, I think, 3 or 4 years after all of this had happened. And he had a new partner at this stage. And I was actually in Byron Bay, and I reached out to him to have a coffee. And we grabbed a coffee, and he actually apologized for ghosting and said that ultimately, from like what I can gather in my memory and what I could garner, he was scared, and that he couldn't see it going anywhere because of the situation we were in. And instead of, talking to me about that, it was just easier to avoid it. And he had shared with me he had avoidant tendencies, so should have seen that coming, but clearly didn't. And it was just that perfect storm. But it was so healing to have that conversation. And I remember I cried saying, how much he hurt me. And I did not expect the tears to come. I just kind of like burst into tears. And I think he was like really taken aback. And I remember he dropped me off at the hotel that I was staying at. And it was one of these like really beautiful hotels in Byron. And he kind of like made a comment about that. And I had it like brought back this memory of him in Hawaii saying that he didn't think that he could give me the life that I wanted. And I guess he saw my life as just this fancy city life in New York City, fancy, quote unquote. But if you're from a very small place in Australia and you're not living in a city like New York City, I think sometimes people have this like preconceived notion that you're like living this like fancy lifestyle. And also like, I like fashion, which is so stupid when you think about it, because like, I love beautiful things. I love staying at gorgeous hotels. It's one of my favorite things to do. I love going to beautiful restaurants. In the same vein, I'm also like, throw me on a boat in the middle of nowhere. Also, I love that I'm on a boat, but I love boats, guys. Or like, put me on a hike. I want to be out in nature in the middle of nowhere. So, there's two sides to me. And I think it kind of broke my heart because in that moment, I realized that there was also insecurities at play for him in that, thinking that he wouldn't be able to give me what I wanted. But, despite any of that, after seeing him and having that apology, I ended up going to Tea Tree Lake because I was in Byron. So I went back to kind of one of the places where it all began. And I took myself there because I had the memory of him taking me there. And I knew it was a healing place. And I remember I was kind of floating in the lake. And I said to myself, it's time to let this go now. And I did feel like just this massive release in that moment. And I really do feel like every part of me knows this is a karmic connection, because I don't think you can feel that way with someone where someone feels so familiar if you don't have that karmic history. But I knew it was time to let it go. And I just lay in that lake and had the chapter close. And I think I'll always have feelings for this person and care for them, but it's not something